Empires do not collapse only because of hackers. They collapse when a missing symbol blinds walls of credentials. And it took the janitor's 11-year-old son to see it first. It was 2 o'clock in the morning, and Boston slept under the thin veil of moonlight. The financial district, usually a cathedral of light, lay dim except for one tower, Whitmore Systems headquarters. Its glass walls glowed with a frantic brightness, as if the building itself was refusing to admit death. Inside, silence reigned, not the silence of peace, but of failure. Row after row of monitors were black, servers dark, and the low hum that normally filled the data floors had been replaced by an almost funereal stillness. A company that powered hospitals, banks, airlines, and retailers across 15 countries had flatlined in less than a second. The numbers were cruel. $900 million lost per day. Yet the figure, staggering as it was, meant little compared to the human cost. Patients' medical records, locked. Bank transfers, frozen mid-transaction. Small businesses, unable to process a single credit card payment. It was as though someone had pulled the plug on modern life itself. On the 41st floor, in the boardroom of glass and walnut, Victoria Whitmore sat at the head of a table that stretched like a runway of despair. Her fingers tapped against the wood, the only sound besides the distant hum of the city below. For 3 days, she had not slept. Her hair, usually immaculate, clung in weary strands to her face. Behind her, a framed Harvard MBA gleamed faintly on the wall, suddenly a hollow credential, powerless to resurrect what had died. In front of her lay a stack of papers stamped in stark black, Bankruptcy Contingency Plan. They were not simply documents. They were death certificates for 12 years of labor, vision, and belief. A digital empire, reduced to ash by lines of code no one could tame. At the far end of the room, as invisible as dust, John Miller, the night janitor, moved quietly between chairs, collecting empty coffee cups, replacing trash bags. He had worked in this building for a decade, passing unnoticed through the lives of executives who barely knew his name. Beside him, his son, Ethan Miller, sat on an oversized chair, backpack at his feet, sneakers frayed, gaze restless. He should not have been there. But John, working another double shift, could not leave him at home alone. Ethan was used to shadows, used to being the boy no one saw. His mother had died when he was 7, and nights with his father had often meant waiting in corners of buildings too large for boys his size. He passed the hours tinkering with an old laptop salvaged from a recycling bin, teaching himself code from YouTube tutorials and online forums, where beginners were mocked but occasionally, if they read carefully, handed golden crumbs of wisdom. That night, his dark eyes wandered to the front of the boardroom. The executives, the consultants, the legends of Silicon Valley sat slumped before a wall of dead monitors. Dr. Alan Brooks, once head of security at Google, rubbed his temples with a pale hand. Professor Hannah Cole of MIT muttered about recursive loops and parser collapse. David Lynn, the white hat hacker whose name had been whispered in FBI briefings, sat silent, eyes hollow. For 72 hours they had tried everything. Snapshots had been restored, checksums verified, entropy scans run, machine learning models fed terabytes of corrupted logs. And yet, every attempt had ended in failure. The system, vast and complex, remained cold. They all agreed. Irrecoverable. Victoria's phone buzzed relentlessly. Investors demanding answers, clients threatening lawsuits, journalists circling like vultures. Employees, too. Ordinary people, fathers and mothers begging to know if their paychecks, their health insurance, their futures would vanish by morning, and the numbers kept flashing red on the board. 900 barrels. 1.8 B, 2.7 B. Ethan felt something stir in his chest. He was used to watching his father bow his head, used to being overlooked. But he could not stand to watch a room filled with the smartest people alive surrender to lifeless screens. Somewhere deep inside, his intuition whispered, "They are drowning because of something small." He leaned forward, his voice barely audible. "Excuse me, can I look at the code?" The air shattered. Laughter rippled through the room, sharp and condescending. How absurd! An 11-year-old, a janitor's kid, daring to speak among experts charging $50,000 a day? Victoria's instinct was to silence him, to demand security remove the child. But she hesitated. Perhaps it was despair, perhaps delirium, or perhaps it was the strange clarity in the boy's eyes, a focus she had not seen in anyone else in days, a clarity untouched by pride or fatigue. "5 minutes," she whispered hoarsely. "Just 5 minutes. Show me what you see." Ethan slid into a chair at the main console, his legs too short to touch the floor. His small hands hovered over the keyboard. His heart pounded, but his mind felt unnervingly calm, like the stillness before a storm. Lines of red errors poured across the monitor. Segmentation fault. Null reference. Fatal parser error at line. To the experts, these were a graveyard. To Ethan, they were strangely familiar. He had seen such errors at midnight on his battered laptop, when the games he tried to program refused to run. He had learned that sometimes entire worlds collapsed, not because of vast complexity, but because of one missing symbol. He scrolled through logs, his eyes darting with unusual speed. Then he stopped. His finger hovered over a single line of code buried deep in a legacy initialization script, untouched for 8 years. "There," he said softly. "You used a semicolon. It should be a colon." The room froze. Dr. Brooks leaned forward, incredulous. "Impossible." "We linted every module." Professor Cole frowned. "Legacy functions don't fail under standard load." But David Lynn, shaking, typed quickly. He paled. "He's right. One character, one misplaced punctuation mark in 40 million lines of code, a semicolon where a colon belonged." Under normal circumstances, the mistake had lain dormant, harmless. But when load spiked 3 days ago, the parser had collapsed, dragging the entire architecture down with it. A cascade failure, like dominoes falling through every subsystem, until even the backups failed, and Victoria's breath caught, a physical pain stabbing her chest. 12 years of work," she whispered. "Billions invested. And we are dying because of punctuation?" Ethan only nodded, legs swinging from the chair, sneakers untied. Dr. Brooks corrected the symbol, hands trembling. The system began to restart. A voice synthetic and mocking filled the air. Initializing. Monitors flickered to life. Data flowed again. Blue light washed over the room like dawn breaking after a 3-day night. For the first time, hope stirred. Victoria looked at the boy, the janitor's son, and for a moment words failed her. An empire had been saved, not by credentials, not by Ivy League pedigrees, not by millions in consulting fees, but by a child, armed with intuition, persistence, and the memory of his own mistakes. In less than 5 minutes, he had shifted the trajectory of 3,000 lives. And yet, as the screens came alive, Ethan's eyes narrowed. Beneath the rush of relief, he noticed something strange in the traffic logs, something moving where it should not. The blue glow that returned to Whitmore Systems was almost blinding. Screens, once blackened with silence, now pulsed with rivers of data, scrolling like rivers freed from ice. Relief swept the room like a sudden breeze through a tomb. Executives leaned back in their chairs, exhaustion melting into disbelief. Dr. Brooks let out a strangled laugh. Hannah Cole muttered, "Unbelievable." And David Lynn rubbed his face with both hands, as though trying to wake from a dream. For 72 hours, the brightest minds money could buy had wrestled with catastrophe. And yet the empire had been resurrected by the smallest hand in the room, a boy with untied shoelaces whose father mopped their floors. The irony was as sharp as broken glass. But Ethan Miller didn't smile. He didn't swing his legs this time. His gaze stayed locked on the streams of data racing across the revived monitors. Something was wrong. He could feel it, as surely as a doctor can feel a hidden pulse beneath the skin. "Why are the logs still noisy?" he murmured, almost to himself. Victoria, standing now with trembling relief, caught the tone in his voice. "What do you mean?" Ethan leaned closer to the console, his small fingers moving quickly over the keyboard. He brought up a series of network access logs. The numbers scrolled in tight columns, timestamps, IP addresses, file paths. To most, they were meaningless strings. To Ethan, patterns emerged like shapes in the clouds. "See this?" he pointed. "These files are being read right now, not just once, but continuously." Dr. Brooks frowned, leaning over him. "That's just residual load. After a restart, systems often re-index." His voice trailed off. The timestamps were current down to the second. Ethan's voice grew steadier. "Someone's in here, right now, downloading your data." The room chilled. Hannah Cole blinked, shaken from her fatigue. "That's impossible. The backup servers were isolated." "They're not." Ethan cut her off gently but firmly. "Look, the requests are coming from authenticated accounts, admin accounts. But no one here is logged in." Victoria's relief cracked like ice underfoot. "You're saying this wasn't just a bug?" Ethan nodded gravely. "The semicolon mistake. No, the colon mistake. It wasn't random. Someone planted it. And while you were trying to fix it, they used the downtime to steal everything." The words struck harder than bankruptcy. At least bankruptcy was a wound you could explain. But theft, ongoing theft, meant exposure, humiliation, lawsuits, betrayal. Robert Hayes, a board member, spoke for the first time, his voice heavy as stone. "If he's right, then we are not victims of bad luck. We are under attack." The experts huddled, their pride stripped bare. David Lynn began typing furiously on his laptop, running packet sniffers, intrusion detection scripts. Within minutes, his face drained of color. "He's right," Lynn whispered. "The data transfer is live. Gigabytes streaming out to foreign relays. Whoever did this didn't just crash your system. They opened the vault." Victoria swayed, gripping the back of her chair for support. 12 years of work, already so fragile from the outage, now dangled over a deeper abyss. Not collapse from incompetence, but from malice. Someone was dismantling her empire deliberately, piece by piece. Ethan continued, his eyes narrow with focus. "And it's not new. Look at the smaller patterns." He brought up historical logs, trailing back months. "See the trickle? Small transactions, a few dollars here and there, spread out across thousands of accounts. Nobody would notice. But it's been happening for at least 6 months. Add them up." He typed quickly, numbers spilling across the screen. "Tens of millions, maybe more." Dr. Brooks slammed his fist against the table. "This isn't theft. It's framing. They're making it look like Whitmore Systems has been embezzling." A stunned silence followed. The scope of the attack widened in their minds. Not just technical sabotage, not just financial bleeding, but character assassination at the corporate level. The kind that ensured no client, no investor, no regulator would ever trust them again. Victoria whispered, "Who? Who would do this?" Ethan hesitated. His fingers tapped nervously against the keys, a child's tick in the body of a detective. "Someone who knew your system well, really well. Look, see the access patterns? These aren't guesses. They knew which legacy functions to target, which admin accounts were vulnerable, which passwords you reuse." The boy turned his gaze toward her, eyes older than 11. "This isn't an outsider. It's someone who worked here." The truth rippled through the room like a detonation. The experts exchanged grim looks. Hannah Cole bit her lip. David Lynn muttered, "An insider." Victoria's memory clawed back names, faces, decisions made months ago. One name rose unbidden. Derek Morrison, her former head of cybersecurity. Brilliant, volatile, resentful. Fired 8 months earlier after a catastrophic oversight nearly cost them a contract. He had sworn as he left that Whitmore Systems would regret underestimating him. She remembered his eyes, cold and wounded, as security escorted him from the building. "Derek," she whispered, her voice hoarse. Ethan nodded. "Yes. Whoever's inside now left trails that match his style. He's not just stealing data. He's orchestrating your destruction. And this," he tapped the log where access spiked again, "this is only the beginning." As if on cue, fresh alarms blared across the screens. File deletions. Systemic corruption. A message appeared in blood-red text. "Whitmore Tech dies today." The room froze. Victoria felt her throat tighten. Around her, the experts, people who had built careers on certainty, looked utterly lost. But Ethan did not move. He sat straighter, as though the chair had suddenly become a battlefield throne. His small hands hovered over the keyboard, trembling, but resolute. "My dad's a janitor," he said softly, almost to himself. "People don't notice him." "They don't notice me either. That's why we see things you don't." He cracked his knuckles, the childish gesture absurd and yet strangely heroic. "Give me access to the firewalls. If Derek is still in here, I'm going to find him." Victoria wanted to scream that this was madness, that no 11-year-old should fight a war against a professional cyber criminal. But she had no illusions left. The experts had failed. The walls of credentials had crumbled, and the boy had already saved them once. Her voice broke, but she forced the words out. "Do it." And so, as dawn crept toward the horizon outside, a janitor's son began the second battle, not against a typo in the code, but against a ghost in the machine. One who knew every corner of their empire, and who would not rest until it burned. For a brief moment, as Ethan Miller's fingers moved across the console, the boardroom had breathed again. The lights of the system flickered back to life, the monitors glowing with rivers of data that whispered of resurrection. But now the glow had shifted. It was no longer the blue calm of restored order, but a red storm spreading like fire across the screens. "Whitmore Tech dies today." The message bled across every monitor in the room. Executives gasped. Phones lit up with alerts from news networks already reporting the collapse. Downstairs, the lobby was filling with cameras, reporters sensing blood in the water. Victoria Whitmore gripped the table with white knuckles. She had fought too many battles to surrender easily, but even her strength faltered now. In 12 years, she had built Whitmore Systems from a garage startup into an empire spanning continents. Now, with billions at stake, she stood on the edge of losing it all in one final sweep. Robert Hayes, the senior board member, rose heavily. "Victoria, we can't wait any longer. If we file bankruptcy now, we may still preserve a fragment. If we delay, we will drown in lawsuits. You must call the lawyers." The words were a knife. To admit bankruptcy was not just financial failure, it was humiliation. It was the admission that everything she had demanded, perfect GPAs, Ivy League diplomas, years of experience, meant nothing when the walls truly cracked. Victoria's lips trembled. "We have no options." But before the lawyers were summoned, a child's voice interrupted. "You have one option." All heads turned toward Ethan. He sat perched on the oversized chair, his thin legs dangling, eyes glowing with an intensity far beyond his years. His father, John, reached to pull him back, but Ethan shook his head. "If you call bankruptcy, you lose everything now. If you give me 5 more minutes, maybe you keep it." Laughter rippled again, but weaker this time. The experts, bruised by their earlier failure, no longer found the boy so amusing. David Lynn muttered, "This isn't a Nintendo game, kid. You're talking about enterprise security." Ethan didn't flinch. "And yet you all missed the semicolon." Silence fell like a hammer. Victoria's chest rose and fell. She looked at the boy, then at the faces of her so-called legends, and realized the truth. Their brilliance had already failed her. Perhaps only desperation could open a new door. She whispered, 5 minutes. "Do what you can." Ethan leaned forward, summoning logs across 3 monitors. His small hands typed with a rhythm not of formal training but of instinct, half learned, half improvised. Windows opened and closed like shutters in a storm. "What exactly are you doing?" Professor Cole demanded. "Looking for fingerprints," Ethan replied. "Real hackers always leave them. Not physical fingerprints, patterns." Dr. Brooks frowned. "What kind of patterns?" "Behavioral ones, the way they move through code." "Like handwriting." The boy highlighted a cluster of deletions spreading through the system. "See this? Too neat. He's not just smashing files randomly. He's deleting in categories, customer data, financial ledgers, but leaving internal HR records untouched. That's not rage. That's choreography." The room quieted. His observation was surgical, undeniable. "He wants you to see this," Ethan continued. "Wants you to know he's in control." David Lynn bent over the screen. "He's right. These deletions are deliberate. Almost like..." His face hardened. "Almost like a performance." Ethan nodded. "Because this isn't only about destroying you, it's about sending a message." The word struck like thunder. A message. Not just sabotage, not just theft, terrorism. Victoria felt the ground tilt. Who would want that? Ethan's fingers danced again. He drilled deeper, following the breadcrumbs through proxy after proxy. Finally, he stopped, eyes narrowing. He tapped the screen where metadata revealed a familiar name. Derek Morrison. The name dropped into the room like a stone in still water. Victoria closed her eyes. She remembered him, the brilliant but volatile head of security she had fired 8 months ago. He had been careless, arrogant, dangerous. When security escorted him out, he had spat words she never forgot. "One day you'll beg for me back." Her stomach turned. "Derek." Ethan nodded. "He planted the bug months ago. He knew when to trigger it. The crash was the smoke. The theft was the fire." Dr. Brooks swore under his breath. "That explains everything. The sophistication, the timing, the insider knowledge." Hannah Cole spoke, voice brittle. "And if Ethan's right, then Derek has been doing this to other companies too. Not just you." Ethan's small hands moved again. Directories filled the screen. TechFlow Industries, CloudSync, DataBR Solutions, dozens of names, companies that had collapsed mysteriously in the last 2 years. Their stock prices had plummeted right before acquisition by shadow investors. Robert Hayes whispered, "He isn't just a hacker. He's a corporate assassin." The room reeled. They were not victims of random misfortune, but part of a grander game, the deliberate manipulation of the market itself. Derek wasn't avenging his firing. He was building an empire on the corpses of others. Victoria pressed her palms to her eyes, forcing herself to steady. "Can we stop him?" Ethan stared at the monitors, his jaw tightening. "Not with lawyers. Not with experts. If you want to stop him, you'll need to fight him where he is." David Lynn muttered, "You mean a digital duel? He's armed with professional tools, military-grade malware." Ethan's reply was quiet but unwavering. "Then I'll have to use what I know. Games, logic, mistakes." John Miller, silent until now, placed a trembling hand on his son's shoulder. "Ethan, this isn't your fight." The boy looked up at his father, eyes clear. "Dad, if I don't try, 3,000 people lose their jobs. Families lose everything. He doesn't just want the company. He wants to hurt everyone connected to it." John swallowed hard, torn between fear and pride. He had mopped these floors for a decade, invisible. Now his son was stepping onto a battlefield none of them could even see. Victoria's voice broke the silence. "Do it. Find him. Stop him." Ethan cracked his knuckles, the childish gesture now transformed into ritual. His small hands returned to the keyboard. "First step," he said, more to himself than anyone. "Slow him down without letting him know." Code streamed across the monitors, windows stacking and vanishing. He rerouted traffic through artificial loops, traffic shaping learned from running overloaded Minecraft servers. Packets that once flowed like rivers now crawled like molasses. Within minutes, data theft slowed by 60%. The attacker, Derek, did not yet notice. He would. But time was everything. The adults watched in awe. "Brilliant," Lynn whispered. "That's advanced network throttling." "Where did you learn that?" Cole asked, incredulous. Ethan shrugged. "When too many players tried to log in, the servers would crash, so I built detours. It's the same idea, just bigger." But already Derek was adapting. New pathways lit up on the screens, bypassing the bottlenecks. Files began vanishing faster than before. Ethan frowned. "He knows. He's accelerating." Victoria's voice trembled. "How long?" 5 minutes, Ethan said. "Maybe less." He took a deep breath. "Then it's time for Phase 2. On the screens, the duel began. Ethan's commands, swift and improvised against Derek's arsenal of polished weapons. It was not just a fight of code, but of imagination versus experience, and the fate of an empire balanced on the keystrokes of a boy. The conference room of Whitmore Systems felt like a tomb that night. The walls of glass overlooked a city that glittered with wealth and certainty, but inside, certainty had collapsed. 3 days of silence, 3 days of failure, 3 days of watching $900 million slip into nothingness every 24 hours. Screens that once pulsed with life were black now, reflections of faces bent under defeat. The board sat in stunned silence, and for the first time in her life, Victoria Whitmore felt herself shrinking into the chair that had once crowned her as sovereign of a digital empire. The experts had exhausted every angle. Dr. Alan Brooks, former Google security chief with a resume so decorated it glowed, confessed that he could not trace the corruption that spread like a digital cancer through their servers. Professor Hannah Cole, her lectures at MIT quoted across the industry, admitted the backups were compromised, their supposed lifeline worthless. David Lynn, the freelance hacker turned white hat mercenary, sat motionless, his reputation as a fixer evaporating before eyes that once admired him. Victoria had bet everything on the brilliance of others, only to find their brilliance dimmed by a single relentless failure. Robert Hayes, a board member whose words cut like scalpels, delivered the final incision. We must accept the inevitable. By tomorrow, bankruptcy must be declared. 3,000 jobs, a collapsed IPO, a broken legacy. Better to close it with dignity than prolong this spectacle. His pronouncement was a coffin lid. Victoria heard it slam shut. She looked at her phone. Messages from employees begging for answers, investors threatening lawsuits, hospitals demanding patient data restored, small businesses bleeding because payments could not move through frozen systems. It was not just a company that was dying. It was an ecosystem of lives entangled with the code they had built. Victoria's chest constricted with the realization that she had been proud of building something global, but she had not seen how fragile it was until it cracked. Then, into the silence, came a voice so small it almost seemed imagined. "Excuse me, could I look at the computer?" It was Ethan Miller, the janitor's son, standing awkwardly in the corner where his father had placed him to keep out of the way. 11 years old, his shoes worn at the edges, his hair untamed, his eyes fixed not on the adults, but on the dead screens. The room turned toward him with a mixture of disbelief and irritation. Alan Brooks chuckled without humor. "Son, this isn't a school computer lab." Hannah Cole managed a tired smile as if humoring a child. David Lynn waved his hand dismissively. "Kid, this isn't Minecraft. These are enterprise systems worth billions." Victoria's first impulse was anger. At Maria for bringing her boy. At herself for allowing distraction in this hour of ruin. "Ethan," she said sharply, "your mother needs you to sit quietly." But the boy didn't move. His gaze stayed on the monitors with an intensity far too focused for mere curiosity. "I know it's not a game," he said softly. "Sometimes computers crash because of something simple. Grown-ups miss it because they think too big. Could I just see the error logs?" The laughter faded. For a moment the room hesitated. Victoria, exhausted beyond pride, felt a madness stir inside her. They had tried everything. They had nothing left. What harm could 5 minutes do? She raised her hand before Brooks could object. "Let him try." The boy walked forward, his small steps echoing like drumbeats. He slid into the chair before the master terminal, feet not even touching the floor. "Show me the logs," he asked with a composure that startled even himself. Brooks sighed, pulled up the diagnostic screen and leaned back, arms folded in cynical amusement. Lines of red scrolled like a river of blood across the monitor. Thousands upon thousands of errors, cascading failures, impossible to parse. Ethan squinted, lips moving silently as if sounding out a language only he could hear. 37 seconds passed. Then he lifted a finger and pointed. "There. That's wrong." Cole frowned, leaned forward. "That's standard syntax." "No," Ethan replied with the quiet patience of someone who had explained such things to himself many times. "You used a semicolon when it should be a colon. This function isn't ending a statement, it's defining a variable. When the system overloaded, it called this line, and everything collapsed like dominoes." The silence was total. Brooks blinked, disbelief shifting to horror as he realized the boy was right. A single character, hidden in legacy code no one had questioned, had brought an empire to its knees. With trembling fingers, Brooks changed the semicolon to a colon. One keystroke. One restart command. The room held its breath. The speakers chimed. The screens flickered. Then, as though mocking their 3 days of panic, the system rebooted itself with cheerful efficiency. Blue light spread across every monitor, streams of data flowing, error logs disappearing, backups synchronizing. After 72 hours of darkness, Whitmore's systems pulsed with life. Cole gasped. Lynn swore softly under his breath. Brooks closed his eyes, humiliation crushing him. Victoria pressed a hand to her mouth as tears blurred her vision. She turned to Ethan, who sat swinging his legs as though he had merely solved a puzzle on a rainy afternoon. "How did you see that when no one else could?" she whispered. Ethan shrugged. "When you learn from YouTube, you make lots of mistakes. You get good at finding the simple things." The weight of the irony was unbearable. 3 days, millions of dollars in consultants, reputations polished with elite degrees, all undone by a single keystroke that an 11-year-old caught in less than a minute. But relief was short-lived. Ethan's eyes narrowed as new lines of code streamed across the monitor. His voice lost its innocence, replaced by the steady tone of someone seeing deeper. "Wait! There's something else. Someone's inside your system. They were using the crash to steal your data." The room froze. Victoria's heart clenched. Brooks lunged for his keyboard. Cole's face drained of color. Lynn muttered a curse. But Ethan didn't move from the chair. His small hands tapped with measured speed, tracing file access logs, uncovering footprints no one else had noticed. "They've been here for months," he said quietly. "And they're still here now." The room felt colder than the snowstorm raging outside. What they thought was salvation was only the beginning. The sun was still hours away, yet the boardroom on the 41st floor felt like high noon. Every shadow exposed, every weakness revealed. The duel between Ethan Miller and Derek Morrison had raged through the night, and though the boy had forced the professional hacker onto the defensive, victory was not yet assured. On the glowing monitors, streams of data shifted like tectonic plates. Some files blinked back into integrity, restored from hidden caches Ethan had shielded. Others disintegrated, falling prey to Derek's deletion scripts. The battle was balanced on a knife edge, and for every triumphant flicker of blue there came another surge of crimson error. But beneath the chaos, Ethan saw something more: patterns. While Derek hurled wave after wave of malware, Ethan traced the paths backward. Each packet was a footprint, each redirect a choice. And in choices, there are always signatures, just as in handwriting or in the mistakes of a child learning arithmetic. "Look here," Ethan whispered, opening a new window. He highlighted timestamps in a table of file access logs. He isn't just deleting everything at random, he's categorizing. Customer data, financial records, contracts. But see what he leaves behind? Internal emails, employee notes, HR records. Professor Cole leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "That makes no sense. Why would he preserve useless clutter?" Ethan shook his head. "It's not clutter to him. It's evidence." Dr. Brooks stiffened. "Evidence of what?" Ethan scrolled to a folder Derek had deliberately spared. Inside were message logs, transcripts of meetings, staff rosters. Each was intact, untouched. "He wants proof," Ethan said softly. "Proof that he destroyed you. Proof he was here. He's building a trophy case." The adults fell silent. The realization settled like a storm cloud. Derek wasn't just erasing a company, he was advertising himself. This wasn't the act of a saboteur hiding in shadows. It was the theater of a terrorist who wanted the world to know his name. Victoria's throat went dry. She whispered the word like a curse. Corporate terrorism. Robert Hayes, ever the pragmatist, added, "And terrorism for hire." Ethan nodded grimly. "Exactly. This isn't just revenge. Look." His fingers raced across the keys. He pulled up directories Derek had stored on his own relay servers, directories Ethan had cracked open during the duel. Names filled the screen. TechFlow Industries, Cloud Sync, Databar Solutions, Orbitronics. Dozens of corporations, some bankrupt, some still reeling from unexplained failures. Ethan opened one at random, and the screen displayed a series of reports, crash logs, financial data, and charts showing plummeting stock values. They weren't accidents, Ethan explained. Every single one of these collapses was planned. Derek hit them just like he's hitting you. Planted bugs, timed failures, data siphons, and every time their stock price dropped right before someone else bought the pieces. David Lynn's face hardened. It's an assassination business model. Destroy, depress, acquire. The room reeled. The scope was staggering. This was not one man's vendetta. It was a systematic campaign of corporate warfare designed to manipulate entire markets. Victoria whispered, almost to herself, "How many jobs? How many families?" Ethan scrolled further, his face pale. Thousands, maybe tens of thousands. He didn't just collapse companies, he collapsed livelihoods. Meanwhile, Derek realized his mistake. The taunting channel he had opened in anger had not only revealed his physical location in Houston, but it was now being used against him. Ethan's backtrace continued like a scalpel through layers of disguise. "You see what he's doing?" David Lynn muttered. "He's peeling through proxies faster than law enforcement could." Ethan didn't look up. "Every game has a maze. You just need to see the exit pattern." The boy's voice was steady, but his face was damp with sweat. He was pushing his mind beyond exhaustion, straining against fatigue that would have broken most adults. His father stood silently behind him, torn between pride and fear. Victoria clenched her fists. "If we can confirm his location, we can bring in the FBI." Ethan shook his head. "Not yet. If they move too soon, he'll scorch the earth, delete everything, not just here, but all his stolen archives." He looked at her with eyes far older than 11. "We need him alive in the system, until I'm ready." It was then that Ethan paused, staring at one log line that had just refreshed. His eyes narrowed. "That's strange," he murmured. Brooks leaned over him. "What is it?" "The bug," Ethan said. "The colon. It wasn't just sloppy revenge coding. Look where it sat, in the initialization function that handles load balancing. He put it there on purpose months ago. Not just to crash you, but to wait. He designed it like a landmine. All he had to do was trigger a traffic spike." Victoria staggered back. "The IPO. He knew we'd generate record load testing before the announcement. He planted the error so it would detonate at the worst possible time." Ethan nodded. It was never an accident. The missing colon was his opening shot in a war. Suddenly, new text scrolled across the monitors. Communication not from Derek, but from someone else. The font was cleaner, the syntax precise. "Proceed with full destruction. The child is more dangerous than anticipated." The room froze. Ethan stared, the color draining from his face. Someone else is talking to him, someone higher. Victoria whispered, "You mean Derek isn't acting alone?" Ethan shook his head. "No. He's a contractor. Someone's paying him to destroy companies one by one." The implications were staggering. This wasn't just one man's vengeance. It was a conspiracy, a market-wide manipulation worth billions. Derek was a weapon, but someone else was pulling the trigger. Victoria turned to her team, her voice shaking. "We can't go to the board with this, not yet. If investors learn we're under targeted corporate warfare, the company collapses tonight. We need proof, evidence, and we need Derek cornered." Ethan nodded. "Then I'll corner him. But when I do, you'll have to move fast. Because once he knows he's exposed, he'll fight like a cornered animal." His father touched his shoulder. "Ethan, you're just a boy. This isn't your responsibility." The boy didn't answer for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "Dad, all my life you've told me people don't notice us. Tonight they noticed me. If I stop now, it all ends. But if I finish..." He glanced at Victoria, his eyes steady. Thousands of families might keep their jobs. John Miller's eyes glistened, but he said nothing more. On the monitors, Derek's attacks intensified. Entire customer databases began to vanish, then reappear, as Ethan's countermeasures intercepted them mid-transfer. The duel had become a pendulum, swinging violently between loss and recovery. Robert Hayes, voice grim, said, "We can't hold much longer. If this boy fails, we're finished. If he succeeds, we buy time. But either way, the market will smell blood." Victoria's gaze locked on Ethan. "Then we give him everything he needs. Every password, every access point, every system. If our empire dies tonight, it will not die without a fight." Ethan nodded once. "Then let's begin Phase 3. He cracked his knuckles again, the ritual no longer childish but ceremonial. His eyes fixed on the streams of hostile code pouring in like a flood. "Derek thinks this is just a game of brute force," he whispered. "But games always have rules, and rules can be broken." As he typed, the room fell silent. Executives and experts alike reduced to witnesses of something they could neither predict nor control. The moment when a janitor's son declared war on a professional assassin of companies and, perhaps, on an entire hidden empire of conspirators behind him. The second noise had become a voice, and that voice was speaking not of collapse, but of defiance. The duel was no longer about saving Whitmore Systems. It was about exposing a world that had thrived in shadows for far too long. The boardroom was suffocating. The smell of ozone from overheating servers mixed with the acrid tang of fear. The battle had raged for hours. The boy's small frame hunched in a chair far too large for him, his eyes burning with exhaustion and focus. Ethan Miller was no longer merely defending Whitmore Systems. He was prying open a secret Derek Morrison had never intended anyone to see. The monitors pulsed with warnings, screens stuttering between collapse and recovery, but in the noise, Ethan began to see shapes, like constellations forming out of scattered stars. At first, it was a trickle, one hidden directory on Derek's relay server, then another. But soon, the trickle became a flood. Ethan leaned forward, sweat dripping from his temple, and whispered words that chilled everyone in the room. "He's not working alone. He's never worked alone. This isn't just one man's revenge. This is an entire network." The data he unlocked was meticulous, precise, and terrifying. Folders labeled with the names of corporations stretched across the screen like a graveyard of the industry. Each contained records of system breaches, files siphoned, stock charts annotated with sudden crashes. Dozens of companies, each undone at the moment when their growth threatened to lift them higher. IPOs halted, mergers destroyed, innovations silenced. Their losses were not random. They were orchestrated. For every collapse, there was a shadow buyer waiting to scoop the remains at pennies on the dollar. Ethan scrolled silently, the names flickering across the room like tombstones. Databar Solutions, TechFlow, Orbitronics, CloudSync, a dozen more. Each one had been struck down, their failure wrapped in mystery, their employees scattered like ash. Victoria Whitmore clutched the table to steady herself. "My God," she whispered. "All those stories, all those unexplained crashes in the last 2 years, it wasn't incompetence. It wasn't bad luck. It was him. It was them." Ethan shook his head. "Derek's only a part of it. He's skilled, but even he couldn't pull off this many coordinated takedowns by himself. He's a contractor, a mercenary. Someone else is commanding this entire war." The room fell into silence except for the sound of fans whirring and the tapping of Ethan's small fingers. His father, John Miller, stood behind him, the mop-handled shoulders of a janitor trembling as he watched his son unravel something no university professor had ever suspected. He had always told Ethan that invisibility was their inheritance. Now the boy was peeling back the veil of an invisible empire. Then a new stream of text appeared across the screen. The words were calm, clinical, and cruel. Proceed with full destruction. The child is more dangerous than anticipated. Every head turned toward Ethan. The boy's lips pressed tightly together. His hands stilled for a fraction of a second, then returned to the keys. "They know about me," he said quietly. "Not just Derek. Whoever's paying him. They know I'm here." Professor Cole's face drained of color. "If they see you as a threat, they won't stop at deleting files. They'll try to erase you too." Ethan ignored her. His focus narrowed, drilling deeper into the exposed directories. Each new layer revealed financial records routed through offshore accounts, payments issued monthly to Derek's shell corporations. The numbers glowed like brands on the screen. $200,000 every month, traced to a Cayman Islands holding company. The description tags told the rest of the story. Contract work, destabilization. Target, pre-IPO companies. Timeline, 2 years. Victoria's stomach twisted. Someone is orchestrating this to control the market. Robert Hayes muttered, "It's not sabotage. It's market engineering. Collapse a company, buy the pieces, consolidate power." His voice hardened. "This isn't cybercrime. This is economic warfare." Ethan's fingers danced again. "And Derek isn't the first. There are logs of other operators, different attack styles, different signatures. They're like assassins, each specializing in a different weapon." On the screen, metadata confirmed his words. Coordinated operations across Europe, Asia, and North America. Derek was just one blade in an arsenal. The realization hit like a cold wind. Whitmore Systems was not merely defending itself from a rogue ex-employee. It had stumbled into a war being waged in silence, a war that had already claimed dozens of corporate victims, reshaping industries while governments slept. Ethan's face tightened with sudden clarity. The colon wasn't just sabotage, it was a signal. It told them when to strike. That's why it was so simple. They don't need elegance when timing is everything. And they timed it to your IPO. Victoria swayed as if struck. Her empire, years of labor and sacrifice, had been marked for destruction as nothing more than another pawn in a larger game. She looked at Ethan, her voice breaking. "Can you stop it?" The boy's voice was quiet but resolute. "I can try, but stopping Derek won't end this. He's only the messenger. If you want to end this war, you'll have to expose all of them." David Lynn swallowed hard. "Then we need law enforcement. The FBI, the SEC, everyone." Ethan shook his head. "Not yet. If we move too soon, they'll erase themselves. These kinds of networks are designed to vanish. We need to trap them while they're still here, and that means keeping Derek online long enough for me to follow every connection." John Miller stepped forward, his voice thick with fear. "Ethan, you can't carry this. You're only a boy." Ethan didn't look up from the screen. "Dad, I'm the only one who can see the mistakes. That's all hacking is, looking for the errors everyone else ignores. They built this empire on arrogance. They think no child, no janitor's son could ever find them. That's their mistake, and I'm going to use it." Victoria's eyes filled with tears she did not let fall. For the first time in her career, she felt something alien in her chest. Humility. She had built her company on the illusion of meritocracy, hiring only the brightest from the most prestigious schools, ignoring those who swept the halls at night. Yet the boy in front of her, with no diploma, no credential but persistence, was teaching her what true merit was. The screens flashed again. Derek's rage surged across the network, his attack tools accelerating, his language devolving into chaotic threats. But even in his fury, Ethan saw another pattern. the rhythm of commands relayed through Derek's servers. Each one pulsed like a heartbeat, and with every pulse, Ethan traced them further back. The path bent and twisted, bouncing through Europe, Asia, the Middle East, but it converged on one hub, a cluster of servers hidden in downtown Miami. "I've got something," Ethan whispered, his face pale but shining. He's not just in Houston. That's where he sits. But his command hub is in Miami. That's where the real network lives. The adults leaned forward, stunned. "If I can breach that hub," Ethan continued, "I'll see all of them. Every name, every file, every payment. It's their brain. Without it, the whole body dies." Victoria found herself trembling, not from fear but from awe. She had spent her life dismissing people like Ethan, people without the right names or degrees. Yet here was a child drawing maps of an empire more dangerous than anything Harvard ever taught her. Ethan's small fingers resumed their dance, faster now, feverish. The duel with Derek was no longer just survival. It had become a chase, a pursuit through the labyrinth of the digital underground. And for the first time, Derek's arrogance cracked. He could sense it. The boy was not only fighting back, the boy was closing in. Victoria whispered as though to herself, "If you find them all, what happens next?" Ethan's voice was steady, though his body trembled with exhaustion. "Then we stop being prey, and we make them afraid." The words hung in the air like a prophecy. In that moment, the janitor's son was no longer a boy at a keyboard. He was the thin line between collapse and survival, between an empire of shadows and the fragile light of truth. And somewhere, in the depths of Miami's servers, the shadow network stirred uneasily. For the first time, its silence was broken. The second noise had become a voice. The hour was cruel. 3:47 in the morning, when even the strongest souls falter and the mind seeks rest. But in the boardroom on the 41st floor, sleep had no place. The air was electric with fear. The monitors pulsed with the heat of invisible combat, and at the center of it all sat Ethan Miller, 11 years old, shoulders trembling under a weight no child should ever bear. Across the digital battlefield, Derek Morrison fought like a wounded animal. His commands tore through the network in frenzied bursts, deleting, corrupting, encrypting. Years of professional training and professional hatred poured into the keyboards of his hidden warehouse. He had been exposed, humiliated by a child, and now his rage had become a firestorm. Victoria Whitmore gripped the edge of the table, her nails digging into the wood. She had faced hostile investors, government inquiries, and markets collapsing under recession. But nothing had prepared her for the sight of a boy waging war against a man who had once been her trusted head of security. Her board members stood paralyzed, watching the duel as if it were an execution delayed by miracle after miracle. Ethan's hands moved with a rhythm that no adult understood. He had no playbook, no certifications, no decade of conference lectures behind him. What he had was something else entirely. The intuition of mistakes, the logic of games, the resilience of a mind that had never been told it was impossible. He had grown up with puzzles that crashed and froze, cheap machines that failed and glitched, and in each failure he had trained his eyes to spot the one line that mattered, the one crack that undid the whole. The screens lit up with red, then blue, then red again. Derek's botnets attacked from 1,000 endpoints, coordinated like soldiers. Ethan countered by turning Derek's own weapons against him, redirecting deletion scripts back into Derek's servers. Each time, Derek clawed his way out, spinning new tunnels, launching new code. Then Derek made his fatal mistake. In his fury, he opened a direct communication channel, a line of text that cut across the screen like a scream. "Who are you? Show yourself." The room held its breath. Ethan looked up at Victoria, his small face pale but steady. "Should I tell him?" Her voice was low, sharp with conviction. "Tell him." Ethan's fingers tapped 3 words. "I'm Ethan Miller." He hesitated, then added, "I'm 11. My dad cleans your old office. And you just lost." The silence on the line lasted 3 long heartbeats. Then the channel exploded with obscenities and threats, a torrent of words so vile that Victoria stepped forward to shield the boy from reading them. But Ethan didn't need to see them. He had already seen what he wanted: Derek's mistake. In his rage, the man had revealed his location. Not just the server farm in Miami. The metadata pulsed with something deeper, something raw. The exact warehouse in Houston, 3rd floor, room 214. Ethan whispered, almost to himself, "Got you." But the battle was far from over. Realizing his exposure, Derek abandoned stealth entirely. His attacks multiplied, brute force and chaos combined. Monitors in the boardroom turned blood red as whole databases flickered toward extinction. Fire alarms wailed in the building. Downstairs, engineers scrambled to prevent servers from overheating into flame. Derek was no longer stealing. He was burning everything in sight. Ethan's small shoulders sagged for a moment. He's trying to erase the company, erase everything, before the FBI can reach him. His voice was barely audible. "I don't know if I can stop him." John Miller stepped forward, placing a trembling hand on his son's shoulder. "Ethan, you don't have to—" But the boy shook his head. "Dad, if I stop now, 3,000 people lose their jobs. Hospitals lose patient records. Families lose their futures. I can't stop." Victoria's voice cracked. "You've already saved us, Ethan. No one will blame you." Ethan cut her off, eyes blazing with a fire too old for his face. "You don't understand. He isn't just destroying you. He's been doing this to everyone. And if I stop now, he wins. Forever." The room fell silent. They watched him straighten, his small hands hovering above the keys like a conductor before the crescendo. "Every game has rules," he whispered. "And every enemy has a weakness. He thinks because he's everywhere, he's untouchable. But the more places he attacks from, the more control he has to keep in one place. That's where he's weak. His command center." The duel shifted. Ethan no longer defended, no longer patched or countered. He hunted. His commands cut through Derek's disguises, following signals backward through false IPs, through encrypted shells, through rented server farms. The screen filled with a labyrinth of connections, each one peeled back like skin from an onion. Brooks gasped. "He's mapping the entire assault network in real time." Cole murmured, "I've never seen forensic tracing at this speed. This should take days." Ethan didn't answer. His face was ghostly, his eyes bloodshot, but his hands moved with supernatural speed. Then suddenly, he stopped. His finger pointed to one line of code pulsing on the monitor. There. On the map of cascading servers, one node glowed brighter than the rest. The Miami hub. Derek's brain, the central command from which his entire empire spread. Ethan took a deep breath. If I can breach that, I can turn his weapons back on him. Everything he's built will collapse. Victoria's voice trembled. "But if you fail..." The boy's eyes locked on hers. "Then you lose everything anyway." The boardroom seemed to tilt. Even the hum of servers fell quiet, as though the machines themselves were waiting. Ethan pressed enter. What followed was chaos given form. Derek realized what the boy had done and threw everything at him. Military-grade malware, encryption that had taken years to refine, brute force attacks from botnets across continents. The screens filled with code streaming at blinding speed, red and blue colliding like armies of light. Ethan fought with improvisation. When Derek encrypted, Ethan built puzzles to unravel the locks. When Derek flooded with bots, Ethan looped them back in endless circuits until they devoured their own strength. When Derek corrupted files, Ethan rebuilt them from shadow copies hidden in forgotten corners. It was not expertise against expertise. It was doctrine against instinct. It was the straight lines of experience clashing against the wild arcs of imagination. Minutes stretched into eternity. Sweat rolled down Ethan's temple, his breath ragged. His small hands trembled but never stopped. Across the city in Houston, Derek's fury became desperation. His taunts grew incoherent. His tools turned sloppy. And then, at 3:47 a.m., he made the mistake Ethan had been waiting for. In his rage, Derek opened a direct console to seize control of the Miami hub himself. For a single second, his defensive shields lowered. Ethan saw the gap. His fingers flew. The boy whispered, "Never leave your back door open." He inverted the channel, flipped Derek's own attack scripts, and redirected every weapon back into the Miami hub. The result was instant and catastrophic. Derek's servers buckled. His malware, designed to destroy, now consumed his own empire. Years of stolen data, terabytes of corporate secrets, the machinery of an underground war, all of it began to rot and vanish. On the screen, a single line of text appeared before the hub collapsed. "No, not a child." Then the connection died. The boardroom erupted in cheers, disbelief, and tears. Systems across Whitmore flickered back into stable blue. Databases returned, backups restored, patient records intact, contracts whole. Against every prediction, Whitmore Systems lived. But Ethan did not cheer. He leaned back in the chair, his face pale, his arms limp at his sides. His small chest rose and fell like a runner at the end of a marathon. His father caught him before he slid to the floor. "It's over," John whispered. Ethan shook his head weakly. "No, Dad. That was just Derek, but someone paid him. Someone bigger. They'll come back. This was only the first battle." Victoria knelt beside him, her voice breaking with awe. "You saved us, Ethan. You saved thousands of families. You saved the truth." The boy's eyes fluttered closed, his voice a faint whisper. "Computers don't care how old you are. They only care if you see the mistakes." The room was silent. Outside, dawn began to rise over Boston, casting pale gold light into the boardroom. A janitor's son had fought a duel in the dead of night and left the world changed forever. But the war in the shadows was only beginning. The dawn light spilled across Boston's skyline, gilding the glass towers with a fragile calm that no one inside Whitmore Systems felt. The boardroom was hushed, a silence not of relief but of aftermath. The monitors, which hours earlier had bled red with Derek Morrison's fury, now glowed steady blue, their data streams restored, their systems intact. Yet no one celebrated. They were too aware of what the boy had said as he collapsed against his father's chest. This was only Derek. Someone bigger paid him. Victoria Whitmore stood at the window, her reflection pale in the glass. Her empire, so close to death, still breathed. But she knew that the boy's warning meant she had been standing not on a battlefield, but on the threshold of a war. Behind her, her board members whispered in fragments, insurance claims, lawsuits deferred, market shocks contained. None of it mattered. What mattered was that her company, her life's work, had been marked not by bad luck, not by one man's bitterness, but by a conspiracy powerful enough to bend markets. The sound of heavy footsteps interrupted her thoughts. Agents in dark jackets entered the boardroom, their movements precise, their presence filling the space with a new kind of gravity. Across their backs, the letters glared in bold yellow, FBI. At their head was Special Agent Jennifer Walsh, her sharp eyes sweeping the room with the measured calm of someone accustomed to chaos. She had been briefed on the situation while still en route, and though the details sounded impossible, an 11-year-old dismantling a cyber-criminal empire, she knew better than to dismiss miracles. "Ms. Whitmore," Agent Walsh said, her voice firm but not unkind. "We've located Derek Morrison. Thanks to information transmitted from this office, tactical teams are converging on a warehouse in Houston as we speak. We'll have him in custody within the hour." A murmur rippled through the room. Relief, disbelief, and dread mingled. Victoria turned, her voice brittle. "If he's arrested, will this end?" Walsh's eyes flicked to the boy still slumped in the chair, John Miller's hand on his shoulder, protective and trembling. "Not even close," she said softly. Ethan stirred, forcing his eyes open, the exhaustion of the night etched into his pale face. His voice was thin but steady. "She's right. Derek was a contractor. I saw the payments. Cayman Islands accounts. $200,000 a month wired like clockwork. He wasn't the brain, he was the hand." Walsh nodded, confirming his words. "We reviewed the files your son extracted. Derek was part of a larger syndicate, a cyber-terrorism ring that's been targeting emerging companies for years. He was effective, but replaceable. When we catch him, we'll learn who gave the orders, and that's the real enemy." The weight of her words pressed on everyone. Replaceable. That meant Derek was not unique. There were others, perhaps many. The thought drained what little color remained from Victoria's face. As Walsh spoke, one of her agents approached Ethan, crouching to his level. "Kid, what you did tonight. I've seen whole government teams fail at this. You turned his weapons against him, tracked him in real time, exposed his network. You saved not just this company, but dozens of others who never knew why they collapsed. That's not just talent. That's unprecedented." Ethan blinked at him, his eyes too weary for pride. "I just saw the mistakes. That's all coding is. Finding the cracks everyone else ignores. He thought no one would look in the old functions. He thought no one would notice a colon." His lips curled in a faint smile. "He thought no one would believe a janitor's kid could fight back." John Miller's throat closed at the words. For years he had walked these same halls invisible, his mop bucket squeaking across marble floors, his presence noticed only when something spilled. Now the son he had raised in silence had been seen more clearly than any of the so-called legends who lined the company's payroll. The agents began setting up laptops, plugging into Whitmore's network to preserve evidence. Streams of code scrolled across their screens, mirroring fragments of the battle Ethan had fought. Dr. Brooks, Professor Cole, and David Lynn, the experts who had once filled the room with their prestige, now hovered like apprentices, watching with reverence the digital traces of a war waged by a child. None of them spoke. They knew humility when it stared them in the face. A phone buzzed. Walsh answered, her jaw tightening. "Houston team confirms," she announced to the room. "Derek Morrison is in custody. His systems seized. His network crippled." A wave of relief washed over the boardroom. For the first time in days, shoulders eased, breaths released. But Ethan shook his head. "That's only the beginning. He wasn't hiding. He wanted to be caught. He left trophies on purpose. He wanted people to know he destroyed you." Victoria turned to him. "Why would anyone want to be caught?" Ethan's eyes met hers with unsettling calm. "Because it sends a message. He wanted other companies to see what happens when they fire him. He wanted to advertise. He wasn't just destroying you, Ms. Whitmore. He was auditioning for someone bigger." The words landed like a fresh wound. The company was not merely a victim. It had been made into an example, Agent Walsh exhaled slowly. We'll take him apart in interrogation. We'll trace the payments, the shell companies, the communications. But your son's right. This is larger than Derek Morrison. It's a network designed to destabilize markets. We estimate dozens of operators worldwide. And someone, somewhere, is orchestrating them. The monitors blinked with a new alert. Ethan leaned forward instinctively, ignoring his father's protective grip. He opened the log and frowned. They know Derek's been caught. Look, traffic spikes on the Miami hub. They're scrubbing it clean, deleting everything. Walsh cursed under her breath. They're covering their tracks. If they erase those servers, we lose proof of the entire conspiracy. Ethan's small hands moved again, fatigue forgotten. Then I'll copy everything before it vanishes. John grabbed his wrist. Ethan, no more. You've done enough. You need rest. The boy looked at his father, his voice quiet but firm. Dad, I can rest later. But if we lose this evidence, they win. All the other families, all the other companies, they'll never know what happened to them. We have a chance to stop more than just one man. We can stop the whole thing. John's hand fell away, torn between fear and belief. The room leaned forward as Ethan's fingers resumed their dance. Windows bloomed across the screen, each showing streams of files pouring from the collapsing hub. He bypassed encryption with tricks learned from puzzle games. Stabilized bandwidth with the same logic he once used to keep Minecraft servers alive during school breaks. Bit by bit, terabytes of stolen records transferred into Whitmore's secure drives, each line of data a fragment of the hidden empire. Victoria whispered in awe, He's not just saving us. He's saving everyone. When the last file completed, the Miami hub went dark. Its servers self-destructed by scripts Derek had left behind. But it no longer mattered. The evidence lived. Ethan slumped back, his body sagging into the chair, his face white with exhaustion. He whispered, We have them. Walsh's voice carried the weight of history. Tonight, a janitor's son just gave the FBI the largest corporate cyber terrorism case in American history. 43 companies, $2.8 billion in manipulated value, an entire underground market exposed. Victoria placed her hand gently on Ethan's shoulder. For the first time, her voice broke openly. You didn't just save my company. You saved the truth. And you taught us what genius really looks like. The boy, barely awake, murmured, Computers don't care who you are. They just care if you see the mistakes. No one spoke after that. Outside, the sun rose, gold spilling across the city, indifferent to the battles fought in the dark. Inside, the world had shifted. A child had stood against an empire of shadows, and for the first time, the shadows flinched. 6 months later, the boy who had once sat in shadows beside a mop bucket now sat in the center of a grand chamber beneath the carved dome of the United States Capitol. The mahogany walls rose high, polished by centuries of debate, the air dense with history. The Committee on Corporate Integrity and National Security had convened in full, every seat occupied, cameras trained, reporters whispering furiously into microphones. And at the witness table, swinging his legs because they did not reach the floor, sat Ethan Miller. He wore his best shirt, though its collar was a little too wide, the cuffs brushing his knuckles. His hair had been combed carefully by his father that morning, and John Miller now sat quietly behind him, calloused hands folded, unsure if he belonged in a room of senators and generals. For years he had scrubbed the corridors of skyscrapers at night, never seen, never acknowledged. Yet today, every eye in the nation turned toward his son. The chairwoman smiled gently, her voice amplified through the chamber. "Mr. Miller," she said, You are the youngest witness ever to appear before this committee. Could you please tell the American people, in your own words, how you came to uncover and defeat what our investigators are calling the largest coordinated act of corporate cyber terrorism in history? The microphones carried his small voice clearly, though it trembled. Mostly YouTube, Ethan said, and a ripple of astonished laughter swept through the chamber. And video games. I didn't know they were supposed to be training. I just wanted to fix things when they broke. And when you play games, you get used to failing. You mess up a lot. So you learn to see the mistakes fast. I think that's why I saw what everyone else missed. The laughter softened into silence, not mocking but awed. Senators leaned forward. Generals nodded gravely. Even hardened reporters lowered their pens, reminded for a moment of something pure. Special Agent Jennifer Walsh testified beside him, her voice measured. The files Mr. Miller preserved led directly to the arrest of 12 individuals across 3 continents. Their activities had destabilized 43 companies, cost nearly $3 billion in manipulated market value, and destroyed tens of thousands of jobs. Without this boy, we would have seen decades of sabotage go unpunished. Ethan listened, blinking at the enormity of numbers he had never cared to count. He thought instead of faces, the engineers who had wept in relief when their systems returned, the employees whose paychecks had been saved, the mothers and fathers whose children would not lose health care because Whitmore systems survived. Those were the numbers he cared about. Victoria Whitmore sat at the same table, no longer the imperious CEO who dismissed a janitor's son as invisible. Her voice cracked when she spoke. 6 months ago, I nearly lost everything I built. But what I almost lost mattered less than what I nearly destroyed, the jobs of 3,000 people who trusted me. I believed in meritocracy, but I defined merit in narrow ways. Ivy League diplomas, perfect grades. I overlooked the possibility that genius could sit right outside my door, disguised in overalls or in a child's sneakers. She turned to Ethan and placed a hand on the table near his small arm. This boy saved us. He saved me from my own blindness. The cameras caught John Miller lowering his head, tears shining in the corners of his eyes. For years he had told his son that people like them would never be noticed. Today, that prophecy lay shattered before the nation. But the hearing was not merely ceremony. Senators pressed with harder questions. Mr. Miller, if Derek Morrison was only a contractor, do you believe the network behind him still exists? Ethan's eyes, though weary, sharpened. Yes. Derek wasn't the brain. He was one hand. The payments came from shell companies. The timing matched financial moves that made billions for people who never touched a keyboard. If you want to stop it, you can't just arrest hackers. You have to follow the money. The room stirred uneasily. Bankers shifted in their seats. Lobbyists frowned in the galleries. For an 11-year-old to state so simply what billions of dollars sought to obscure was both unsettling and undeniable. Another senator leaned in. And what about you, Ethan? What do you want now? The boy hesitated, glancing at his father. Then he spoke softly. I just want kids like me to know being different isn't bad. Maybe you don't learn in the ways adults understand. Maybe you don't have the money for schools. Maybe your dad cleans offices at night. That doesn't mean you're invisible. Sometimes it means you see things they can't. Computers don't care how old you are or what school you went to. They just care if you see the mistakes. The chamber was silent, his words falling like scripture. After the testimonies, the committee announced reforms. The Whitmore Foundation, funded by Victoria, had already launched scholarships for 300 underprivileged children to pursue technology. Ethan's story had sparked coding clubs across the nation, children teaching themselves with free tools, proving that brilliance does not belong to the privileged alone. But beneath the applause and promises, shadows lingered. For buried in the evidence Ethan had preserved were messages not yet decrypted, communications from the network's higher masters. The child is more dangerous than anticipated. Increased timeline. Full destruction protocol. The committee saw the warning. The FBI saw it too. And though Derek Morrison now sat in a federal prison, the identity of the one who had paid him remained hidden, cloaked in layers of shell corporations and offshore accounts. As the hearing adjourned, reporters surged. Flashbulbs blinded. Children watching at home would later tell their parents they wanted to be coders, not athletes, because of the boy on television. But Ethan, clutching his father's hand as they slipped out a side door, felt none of the glamour. He felt only a tremor of unease. For all the cameras, for all the applause, he knew the truth. Derek had been a symptom. The disease remained. Somewhere, someone had marked him as a threat. And threats, in the world Ethan now glimpsed, did not go unanswered. That night, in a cheap hotel near the Capitol, Ethan sat by the window staring at the glow of the city. His father slept fitfully on the second bed, worn from months of fear and travel. Ethan opened his old laptop, the one he had patched with duct tape and salvaged parts. He scrolled through the fragments of code he had copied from the Miami hub, strings of numbers, encrypted lines that whispered of conspiracies not yet solved. He whispered to himself, "If they think I'm dangerous, then I can't stop now, because the real enemy hasn't shown their face." And in the silence of Washington, under the dome that had just hailed him as a hero, the janitor's son began again. Not to play, not to practice, but to prepare for the war still waiting in the shadows. Snow fell gently over Washington, dusting the marble steps of the Capitol and softening the harshness of the world Ethan Miller had been thrust into. It had been nearly a year since the night he exposed Derek Morrison and collapsed the empire of corporate cyber-terrorists. A year since he had been branded both prodigy and target. A year since he learned that brilliance draws enemies as swiftly as it does praise. Ethan was no longer simply a janitor's son tinkering on a duct-taped laptop. He was a national figure, invited to think tanks, consulted by the FBI, lauded in magazines. Yet when the applause faded, he returned each evening to the same small apartment with his father. Fame had not changed who he was. But it had changed the world's gaze, and the shadows that followed him had grown darker. On a late winter night, as his father slept, Ethan sat before the glow of his screen, scrolling through data fragments he had never abandoned. Deep within the encrypted logs he had pulled from Derek's servers lay patterns still unresolved. Each attempt at decryption revealed another veil, another disguise. But that night, something shifted. The random noise aligned. The maze of numbers bent into coherence. The coordinates were not random. They were time-stamped access points routed through global exchanges, yet they converged impossibly on one location: the Federal Trade Commission. The realization struck like ice water. Whoever orchestrated the sabotage of 43 companies had not been a foreign adversary. It had been someone with access to the very machinery meant to protect the markets. Ethan's breath quickened. He reran the data, confirmed the traces, and then sat back in silence. His fingers trembled over the keyboard. "Dad," he whispered, though John slept across the room. The betrayal was too enormous to speak aloud. The enemy was not just outside the system. The enemy was the system. By dawn, the FBI task force convened. Agent Walsh's face was grim as Ethan presented his findings. "If he's right," she told the room, "this isn't just a cybercrime ring. It's systemic corruption, sabotage disguised as market volatility, executed with federal protection." The air thickened with disbelief, but the evidence glowed undeniable on the screens. shell companies feeding into accounts traced back to senior officials. The crash of Whitmore Systems had been a single move in a broader game, a game worth billions. Yet exposure would not be simple. The names Ethan uncovered were powerful enough to bury the truth, powerful enough to silence a boy and erase the evidence. Victoria Whitmore, seated in the back, spoke quietly. "If you release this recklessly, Ethan, they'll destroy you before they destroy me." But Ethan, only 11, met her gaze with a steadiness far older than his years. "They already marked me as dangerous. If I stay silent, I've already lost." The plan unfolded not in the sterile offices of government, but in the dim conference room of Whitmore Tech, the same room where Ethan had first been dismissed as irrelevant. This time, he sat at the head of the table. His father on one side, Agent Walsh on the other, and an army of systems glowing before him. They would not fight in secrecy. They would fight in the open. Ethan initiated the cascade at exactly 2:00 a.m., the same hour he had once walked silently behind his father's mop bucket, unnoticed. With the precision of a surgeon, he redirected the hidden pipelines of data, not to his own machine, but to servers under the custody of Congress, mirrored simultaneously to international watchdogs. The stolen billions, the manipulation trails, the internal memos, every layer of the conspiracy went live in real time, beyond the reach of any one hand to suppress. The retaliation was immediate. Systems flickered, alarms wailed, and new attacks slammed against the defenses Ethan had built. But this time, he was not alone. Dr. Carter, humbled months before, now stood at his side, adapting his decades of experience to the boy's unorthodox methods. Sarah Martinez applied academic rigor to Ethan's intuition, mapping vulnerabilities into proof. David Park, once a skeptic, now defended the firewalls with the fury of a convert. And John Miller, who had never touched a computer until his son showed him, stood behind Ethan, a quiet sentinel, hand resting on his boy's shoulder. For 3 hours, the room burned with light. Code cascaded across the walls like storm clouds. Attacks ricocheted like artillery. Somewhere, hidden behind false addresses and encrypted fortresses, the architects of the conspiracy realized their own exposure. They unleashed everything they had. But their weapons turned into evidence, each assault preserved in mirrored archives beyond deletion. At dawn, it ended, not with silence, but with the sound of the world awakening. News anchors breathless with revelation. Senators demanding resignations. Markets shuddering as truth carved through illusion. And in the middle of it all, a boy sitting in a chair too large for him, eyes red with exhaustion, whispering only, "It's over." But it was not over for him. It was only beginning. 2 weeks later, Ethan returned to the Capitol, not as a witness this time, but as a symbol. The hearing room was packed again, but the atmosphere had shifted. The scandal had toppled careers, dismantled financial empires, and triggered sweeping reforms. For the first time in decades, legislation passed unanimously. Laws protecting whistleblowers, funding for open-access coding education, mandatory transparency in corporate cybersecurity. Victoria Whitmore, once nearly ruined, announced the largest educational endowment in her industry's history. Scholarships for underprivileged children to study computer science, no matter their background. She named it the Janitor's Son Foundation. John Miller wept when he heard. Ethan sat quietly through the speeches, too young to grasp the full scale of what had been unleashed, but old enough to understand this. The world had changed, not because he was extraordinary, but because he had refused to stay invisible. As the hearing adjourned, a reporter pressed forward. "Ethan, do you think you'll keep working with the FBI?" The boy smiled faintly, a flash of childhood breaking through the weight on his shoulders. Maybe. But mostly, I just want to keep fixing things that are broken. That's what I like doing. Later that night, back in the apartment, John placed the old mop handle against the wall. He no longer worked night shifts. Whitmore Tech had insisted he take a position of honor. But Ethan reached for the mop, running his hand along its worn wood. "Don't throw it away, Dad. It's part of the story." And so it remained, a symbol of the invisible labor that had polished the floors beneath billion-dollar deals, a reminder that genius can grow from the humblest soil. Outside, snow fell again, quiet, persistent. Somewhere beyond the city lights, new enemies no doubt whispered. But in one small apartment, a boy leaned over his laptop, his father watching close, and the future of cyber defense began, not in ivory towers, but at a kitchen table where courage and humility sat side by side. The janitor's son had not just saved a company, he had rewritten the terms of power. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. If it moved you, if it made you believe that brilliance can come from the most unexpected places, please subscribe, share, and leave a comment. Your support helps these stories reach more hearts around the world.